Alright, so this is just a overall kind of recap, touch on some of the important topics that were discussed in our Module 1 readings, which of course were Chapter 1 and Chapter 6. Now, who can tell me who this fun-loving couple is? That's right, that's Bonnie and Clyde, famous bank robbing duo. So feminism. You know, we talked about this a lot in the other PowerPoint about the cost of being female, where we're not talking about just male versus female, but rather the gender too, right? The difference, the societal norms, right? What, how females are supposed to behave and dress opposed to their male counterparts. It touched on the fact that, women do not have common experiences, right? Not all women have the same common experiences. So when they first started talking about females and female criminology, those are the things that were discovered or talked about early on when we talk about feminist criminology. But then we've got into this what's called this sort of third wave of feminism, where we get a bit of a better understanding, right? Because we know it can't just be women versus men, but there's a lot more to take into account, right? Race, ethnicity, nationality, sexuality, and of course I'm going to add in there social, economic backgrounds of women. So in the later chapters and modules, we'll discuss women as offenders and women as victims and how those interplay. But it does start at chapter 6. In this module, we start talking about the theories anyway. We'll get more into that a little bit later. So who is the woman photographed here? That's Griselda Blanco, the godmother, La Madrina, right? The Colombian drug lord of the Medellin cartel. Early 80s to 2000, where she was suspected of over about 250 or so murders. So, very famous woman criminal, right? Drug lord, right? Does that normal behavior? Women, do we always think of women, female criminals as drug lords? Probably not, but she's definitely the most famous that we can think of. It comes to mind. So again, we're going to have, I put together in the module, you'll see that there's a criminological theory study sheet. It's just a basic spreadsheet. You can add to it, make it your own in a way to simplify the theories that make sense to you. And then we'll get into the theories of victimization in the second module. So just to touch briefly, the text did talk about a lot of these data sources, right? And here we go, a bunch of acronyms, right? The UCR, the Uniform Criminal Reporter, and then of course the NIBRS, and the one that I think is kind of most important, the NCVS, right? Which is just it's a survey is what that is. The National Crime Victimization Survey. So it's not of reported crimes, and that's where we get this notion of what's called the dark figure of crime. So this is a survey, not reported crimes. And for a myriad of reasons, right, that crimes don't get reported. And of course, we're going to explore more in the next module when we tackle rape and sexual assault crimes. Definitely a difficult and sensitive topic. So who has heard of the Countess? Countess Elizabeth Bathory. She killed over 600 girls, and this of course was a long time ago, late 1700s, okay? So, it isn't like females being criminals is anything new. It's just we don't really often think of it, I think, a lot of times as women. So here's a collage of some women, female criminals, right? So in the context of what kind of crimes do women commit? Well, I think we all know they commit all sorts of crimes, right? Every crime that a man commits, women do so as well. Bank robbery. And if you don't know, that's Jody Arias, right? She's the one who murdered her ex-boyfriend. And good old Martha Stewart, right? The embezzlement, one of the so-called white-collar crimes. And again, we'll discuss in depth a little bit more the types of crimes, though, that are a little bit more typical of women. And that will be in Module 3 as we will read and learn in Chapter, I believe it is in Chapter 8. We'll start talking a little bit more about that. Okay, so now we get into the theories of female criminality, or the criminological theories devoted to the female criminal, right? So I'm not going to go through a whole lot, because it's in the text, just, kind of hit on a couple of things. But we start with, of course, the early theorists. So you got Lombroso and Ferrero back in 1895. Now, I got to tell you, their theory, yes, it was 1895, but even then it's a little out there, right? Because what do they basically say? They basically say that, women that are less evolved than men, that's based on their physical characteristics, right? So they're more primitive, they say, which essentially they're saying women offenders look more like men, and that's why they commit crime. And I just think that's kind of barbaric, right? So if you look like a man, then they just found this weird correlation. Of course, they went to a prison, right? So if these women look more like men, that's probably why they committed crime. But again, that was back in 1895, so that's the conclusion they came to. And then we get to the Glecks, and theirs is kind of interesting as well, too, I think, because I think they hit on something, right? Because they're saying there is a connection now between crime and delinquency. And they looked at the role of family, right? What does family play on delinquency? Which I think that still definitely plays part today. And then we get into Otto Pollock, who wrote this book, The Criminality of Women, in 1961. And it basically is saying it's the so-called hidden nature, right? Women by their nature of just being women, right? They can manipulate males into doing, quote, the so-called dirty work. They are the masterminds behind crime. Because they said that they kind of just did more petty crimes. Again, this was 1961, and who knows, even to this day, there probably might still be some truth to that. And then we get into a few more traditional theories, and the first one is going to be Travis Hershey's social bond theory. Social bond, right? It's even still popular, supposedly, today, with the focus on, and the book highlights them there, and there it is, right? Basically, he identified these four types of bonds, right? You've got attachment, a sensitivity to and interest in others. Talks about commitment, time, energy, and effort spent on conventional activities, their involvement, and belief, right? So commitment really refers to, right, the investment that an individual has to the normative values of society is what he's talking about. Basically, then it goes on to, right, then we've got this commitment, right? Basically, so if, for instance, if someone is committed to obtaining that college degree, then they know they're committed to that goal, right? So they're committed to that goal. doing something illegal would hurt their chances of achieving that goal. When we talk about involvement, that just refers to the level one might participate in conventional activities. Again, talking about doing studying or playing sports. And that they will point out here too that if youth are involved in more, sorts of things like sports, that they're going to be less likely to engage in delinquent activities, right? So basically, you keep the youth involved in doing something productive, the less likely they are to engage in delinquent activities. That's probably still true. And then finally, the belief, it just boils down to that, right? Participation in conventional activities. If you accept the rules of society, then you're going to obey them, is what the social bond theory is describing there. So the differential association theory, just to point out there too, that gender was absent also from that theory, right? No difference between, they were not focused on the difference between men and women. It was just everybody, this differential association theory. The one that posits that learned behaviors are a result of, who you hang around with, right? Who are the people that you associate with. Now, Sampson and Loeb's life course theory, now this is 1993, so we're getting a little bit more modern, right? Their theory suggests that the events of, life basically can provide insight as to why one might engage in crime. And this really does put the importance on that of adolescence. But again, this was another one that was not a specific feminist crime theory, meaning that they did not take into account how these sorts of things would impact men and women differently. Just a general, I guess you could say, gender neutral theory. But, there's probably, really, you think about it, there's going to be some truth probably into all of these theories for why people, offend. So then we get to Adler and Simon. Now this is interesting, right? Because now we're getting into the so-called, it wasn't so-called, it really was called, right? The women's liberation movement. And the whole notion behind that was, again, women's liberation, right? Hey, if men can commit crime, then so can we, right? Meaning women, right? And they did think to hit on this fact that the women, right, they're gonna generally create and commit crimes such as property crimes. That their violent crime is not something that women would typically engage in. However, they might evolve to that, I guess is more of what you could say about that. So you got Adler and Simon focusing on, right, women's lib to explain for increasing crime rates. That's what they were trying to do. And then you get to John Hagen and his power control theory, which assesses how patriarchy can influence gender role socialization, and in turn how this process impacts rate of delinquency. So he starts with this premise, right, that women and girls are socialized in different ways than men from boys, right? They're introduced to, girls are introduced to certain things, and boys are introduced into certain things. So this is how we're getting at, how are they socialized, and the ways that maybe they could lead to or explain, right, why women commit crime. And then we get to Chesney Lind. You have to understand, they're saying, right, multiple influences when trying to understand issues of gender and crime. Again, this is a newer theory as well, but I think that's kind of important to know, right? There isn't just one explanation is what they're getting at. It's the whole role of our experiences with women even being victims to shape the how women can commit crime. So there's multiple reasons, no one reason for it. And then we're going to talk about specifically this whole notion that patriarchy matters, from Chesney and Lynn, as we get into a little bit later into chapter 5. Module 5, the last module. So the conclusion, right, to basically these was the theories is to study why people commit crimes, and of course the playing field is not equal. Women are different from men in various ways. Women commit crimes for different reasons, different motivations, and as we'll get into the theories of victimization, I think we'll start to be able to see that. We talked about Grana and his cost of being female. And in the Maraskin article that you were also supposed to read, right, it's just really the historical development of women's issues. So there was a lot there, a lot of, you'll see again, just to go back to that kind of table I put together of the theories, right? You can go back and just add whatever makes you remember those sorts of things, because if you choose, like you can, right, you can choose to do a term paper rather than the interview. If you do a term paper, you're going to have to discuss, the theories and which one you think might explain why the woman that you chose to write about committed the crime. So again, just a brief overview of all that. There was a lot to read in there. So we'll be back with another PowerPoint for Module 2.